At 3:17 in the morning, medicine says the human body is at its most fragile point. Statistically, it is the time when most people die. And I was there, awake for 40 hours, holding the hand of a man who, according to all neurological reports from the best hospitals in the world, was nothing more than an empty shell. A vegetable. His name was Arthur, and I was singing to him. I was singing softly, almost a whisper, just to drown out my own fear and the sound of the rain beating against the window of that isolated mansion. I needed to forget that I was in a room where the door had been locked from the outside. But that night, the frequency of the heart monitor changed. It wasn't gradual. It was violent. The beeping sound sped up rapidly. His hand, which had been inert on the sheet for 6 years, gripped my wrist with a strength that almost crushed my bones. I froze. The shock stopped me from screaming. And then, his eyes opened. The pupils were dilated, focused, terrified. He hadn't moved for almost a decade. But when he opened his mouth, it wasn't a meaningless moan of pain that came out. It was a clear and hoarse warning, as if he had gravel in his throat. Stop singing, or she will kill you too. To understand why I was in that room, holding the hand of a millionaire who was supposed to be in a coma, we need to go back 90 days in time. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't a doctor. I was just a broke musician, with an eviction notice stuck to the door of my apartment, and exactly 35 reis in my bank account. When desperation hits, we ignore the warning signs. And the ad I saw in the newspaper was, basically, a big danger sign flashing in red. It just said, high pay, night work, absolute discretion. I called. They didn't ask for my resume. They didn't ask for a criminal record. The cold voice on the other end of the line asked me just one question. Do you have family who would miss you if you traveled for a long time? I looked at the photo of my deceased parents on the shelf and said, no. Little did I know that that answer had just sealed my fate. The Blackwood residence didn't look like a family home. It looked like a mausoleum waiting for corpses. It stood at the top of a hill, always surrounded by a thin mist, isolated from everything. It wasn't the patient's family who received me, but a lawyer named Dr. Elio, a man who smelled of antiseptic and expensive cologne. He took me to a dark library and placed a contract on the table. The salary was double what was in the ad, 30,000 reis a month. My eyes lit up. I had never seen so much money in my life. But Dr. Elio didn't smile. He said the money came with strict conditions. There were 3 rules printed in bold in the contract, and I needed to memorize them. Rule number 1, I must never leave the patient's room between midnight and 6 in the morning. The door would be locked electronically by a security system, for my own protection, according to him. Rule number 2, all food and drink I consumed must be provided exclusively by the house. Nothing from outside. Not even a bottle of water. And rule number 3, the strangest of all. The lawyer looked me in the eye and said slowly, under no circumstances, try to communicate with Mr. Arthur. He does not hear, does not feel, and does not understand. If you think he reacted, you are hallucinating. And if you report this in any log, you will be fired for cause immediately. I signed. At that moment, I thought I was being paid to take care of a sick old man. I didn't know I was being paid to be a jailer, or perhaps the next victim. Dr. Elio handed me an old key and pointed to the stairs. He is in the east wing. And Clara, if you hear noises in the walls, it's just the rats. The house is very old. I went up the stairs, feeling the eyes of the portraits on the wall following me. The corridor was long and cold. When I touched the doorknob of the room, I felt a shiver down my spine that science cannot explain. I turned the knob. The strong smell of medicine hit me like a punch. And there he was, the man who would change everything. But there was something in the corner of the room, something the lawyer forgot to mention, and which made me freeze in the doorway. Upon entering that room, the first thing I noticed wasn't the luxury of the Victorian furniture or the view of the dead garden outside. It was what was in the dark corner, near the ceiling. A camera, a huge black lens, with a red light that blinked incessantly every 2 seconds. It was pointed directly at Mr. Arthur's face. 24 hours a day. That chilled me. Who watches a man in a vegetative state with such zeal? If he cannot move, why the maximum security? I approached the bed. My footsteps on the wooden floor sounded like thunder in that industrial silence, broken only by the mechanical rhythm of the pulmonary ventilator. In the center of it all was him. At 50 years old, Arthur looked 80. His skin was pale, translucent like rice paper, stretched over the bones of his face. The lawyer had said he suffered a catastrophic vascular accident, but looking closely, that didn't look like illness. It looked like a punishment. Mr. Arthur, I called out, knowing there would be no answer. He didn't move. His chest rose and fell forced by the machine. But then, it happened. It was fast, a matter of milliseconds, but I saw it. When my shadow fell over his face to check the pupil of his left eye contracted. It wasn't a light reflex. It was fear. Genuine panic. During the day, The routine was macabre. Nurses entered and left silently, changed the 4, checked the camera obsessively, and left. No one spoke to him. No one touched him with humanity. He was treated like expensive furniture that couldn't gather dust. But rule number 3 of the contract echoed in my head: if you think he reacted, you are hallucinating. I needed to be sure. I waited for the nurses to leave. I stood with my back to the camera, blocking the lens's view with my body, pretending to arrange the pillows. And then, I whispered right into his ear, "If you can hear me, blink twice." I waited. 1 second. 5 seconds. Nothing. I was about to give up, feeling like a fool, when I saw it. An eyelid twitched. Once. And, with an effort that seemed painful, it twitched again. Twice. My blood ran cold. He wasn't in a coma. He was trapped. Incarcerated inside his own flesh, conscious of every second, while a camera broadcast his suffering to someone in that house. I wasn't taking care of a patient. I was guarding a hostage. The discovery changed everything, but I couldn't do anything. Fear paralyzed me as much as the disease paralyzed Arthur. And the nights were the worst part. Exactly at midnight, I heard the heavy metallic sound of the door's electronic lock engaging. Click. The sound echoed through the corridor. I was locked in with him until 6 in the morning. No internet, no cell phone, which they confiscated at the entrance, and surrounded by shadows that the weak light of the lamp couldn't dispel. The house groaned. I heard footsteps upstairs, dragging, as if someone were pulling something heavy in the attic. To keep from going crazy with the noises and the feeling of being watched by the camera lens, I started doing the only thing that brought me peace: singing. It started on the 3rd night. I sat in the armchair, away from the camera, and started humming softly. They were simple melodies, old songs my mother used to sing to me. I sang to drown out the silence of death that haunted that place. But something strange happened. Whenever I sang, Mr. Arthur's heart monitor changed. The heartbeats, which were irregular and anxious, stabilized. His breathing seemed to fight less with the machine. On the 5th night, I worked up the courage. I pulled the chair right up to the bed, held his cold hand, and sang a sad ballad about longing. I looked at his face, and that was when I understood that music wasn't just entertainment, it was a bridge. A solitary tear rolled down the corner of his eye and disappeared into the pillow. He was crying. That man, who supposedly felt nothing, was crying at my voice. It was in that moment that I created our secret ritual. Every night, as soon as the door locked, I sang to him. It was our conversation. I told him about my day through music, and he responded with the calm of his heart on the monitor. We were building an invisible connection, right under the noses of our jailers. But I didn't know that the music was doing more than calming him. It was waking up parts of his brain that were supposed to be dead. I was, without knowing it, preparing him for the war that was coming. And the war arrived sooner than I expected. The following week, the bedroom door opened at a time when it should have been locked. It was 2:15 in the morning when rule number 1 was broken. I was dozing in the armchair, exhausted, when a sharp sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the sound of the lock closing. It was the electronic beep of the door unlocking. My heart stopped. No one was supposed to enter there after midnight. The contract was clear. Instinctively, I didn't get up. Years of living alone had taught me that, sometimes, the best defense is to play dead. I relaxed my body in the armchair, closed my eyes, leaving only a tiny slit between my eyelashes to see what was happening, and controlled my breathing to make it sound heavy and slow. The door opened slowly. The hall light drew a long silhouette on the bedroom floor. I smelled it before I heard the footsteps. That sickly smell of antiseptic mixed with expensive cologne. It was Dr. Elio, the lawyer. He entered the room without ceremony. He walked to Arthur's bed with the arrogance of someone who owns the place. I saw him take something out of his jacket pocket, a small syringe with a yellowish liquid. He didn't check the monitor. He didn't check the blood pressure. He went straight to the venous access in Arthur's arm. While slowly injecting the liquid, he leaned in and whispered something into the paralyzed man's ear. The room was so silent that I could hear every cruel syllable. "You are stubborn, Arthur. Anyone else would have given up by now. But don't worry, today's dose is double. Tomorrow you won't even remember trying to move those fingers." He gave Mr. Arthur 2 humiliating pats on the face, discarded the syringe in his pocket, and turned to me. I stopped breathing. I felt his gaze burning on me in the armchair. He stood there, watching me, for 10 interminable seconds. If I had moved a muscle, if my eyelid had twitched, I would be dead. Finally, he let out a sigh of contempt and left, locking the door again. As soon as the click of the lock sounded, I jumped out of the chair. I needed to know what he had injected, and I needed to know fast, before it reached Arthur's heart. I ran to the bed. The yellowish liquid was already descending through the 4-tube, inches from entering his vein. I didn't think about the cameras. I didn't think about the contract. With trembling hands, I closed the 4-valve, stopping the flow. I looked at Arthur. His eyes were wide, full of dread. He had heard everything. He knew what had been happening for years. It was in that moment that the puzzle pieces clicked together in my mind with a horrible snap. His paralysis wasn't the aftermath of a stroke. It never was. That man was being held in chemical captivity. The medicine they gave him wasn't a cure. It was a neuromuscular blocker, something to keep his mind awake, but his body shut down. And then, an even more terrifying thought hit me. Rule number 2. All food and drink must be provided by the house. I looked at my dinner tray, untouched on the corner table. The soup, the juice, they weren't just drugging Arthur. They must have been drugging me too. Low doses, enough to make me drowsy, compliant, so I wouldn't see Dr. Elio's nightly visits. That was why I felt so tired, so spaced out in the first few days. I was being slowly poisoned. I looked at the camera in the corner of the room. The red light blinked. If they saw that I closed the 4, the game would be over. I needed to be smart. I opened the valve again, but discreetly disconnected the tube from the needle in his arm, hiding the loose end under the sheet and mattress. The poisonous liquid would drip onto the floor, absorbed by the rug, while the camera would show the 4 flowing normally. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, hoping he understood the gravity of the situation. I know what they are doing. From today on, you take no more of this poison, but you need to keep pretending. If they realize you are regaining movement, they will kill us both before dawn. Arthur blinked twice. He understood. We had a plan. But what I didn't know was that withdrawal from that drug would cause violent reactions in his body, and the storm that was brewing outside was the least of our problems. Over the following nights, the room turned into a silent battlefield. With every dose of medicine I diverted to the mattress, Arthur's body began to wake up. But it wasn't pretty. It was agonizing. His muscles, asleep for years, began to have violent spasms. Cramps pulled at his fingers and toes, causing his body to arch in the bed. He broke out in a cold sweat. His eyes rolled back in pain, but he couldn't scream. If he made any audible sound, the camera would pick it up. Dr. Elio would come. I had to hold him down in bed, using my own weight to prevent the spasms from being visible to the camera lens. I wiped the sweat from his forehead and whispered, "Hold on, please, hold on." To disguise what was happening, I changed our ritual. I stopped with the lullabies. They were too soft, too passive. I needed something that gave him strength, something to cover the sound of his gasping breath. I started singing hymns, marching songs, music with a strong rhythm and lyrics about overcoming. I sang with fierce intensity, looking into his eyes, turning every note into an order: fight, come back to me. And it worked. On the 4th night without the poison, I was changing the sheets when I felt something touch my arm. It wasn't a spasm. It was a deliberate touch. I looked down. Arthur's hand was holding my forearm. The fingers were weak, trembling, but the grip was real. He turned his neck slowly, the first voluntary head movement in 6 years, and stared at me. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a word. It took me a while to understand the lip reading, but when I did, I felt a lump in my throat. He said, "Thank you." But our small victory was short-lived. As I smiled at him with tears in my eyes, the room light flickered, once, twice, and went out completely. The hum of the pulmonary ventilator stopped. Absolute silence took over the house. The storm outside had knocked out the power, and the emergency generator didn't turn on. It was pitch black. The only light came from the lightning tearing the sky outside, illuminating the room in ghostly flashes of blue and white. Without the mechanical ventilator, Arthur began to suffocate. He tried to pull in air, but his diaphragm was still too weak after years of atrophy. His chest rose and fell in a desperate, shallow rhythm. I went into controlled panic mode. I grabbed the ambu bag, that manual resuscitation balloon on the wall, and started pumping air into his lungs manually. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Breathe, Arthur. Don't you dare die now, I shouted, completely forgetting about the camera, which was now off without power. That was when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. They weren't cautious footsteps like Dr. Elio's. They were heavy, fast. Boots hitting the wood. Someone was coming, and it wasn't to help. The bedroom door flew open with a bang, kicked in. In the light of a lightning bolt, I saw the silhouette of a tall man in the doorway. He held a powerful flashlight in one hand and something metallic in the other. It wasn't the doctor. It was the house security guard, a brute I had only seen from afar at the gate. He pointed the flashlight straight at my face, blinding me. Dr. Elio sent word that the life support system failed. His voice was thick, emotionless, and that its shame the patient didn't make it. He wasn't there to check if the generator was working. He was there to ensure Arthur died of suffocation. It was the perfect opportunity. Mechanical failure due to the storm. No one would suspect murder. The guard took a step inside, blocking the exit. He looked at the ambu bag in my hand, keeping Arthur alive, and then at me. "Drop it, girl. Let him go. It'll be easier for everyone." I squeezed the bag harder. "Get out." He laughed. A dry sound, and he started walking toward me, raising the object in his right hand. It wasn't a firearm. It was a pillow. He was going to finish the job the old-fashioned way. I was cornered between the bed and the wall, pumping air into a man who couldn't defend himself, while a killer walked toward us in the dark. That was when Arthur's hand, which I thought was weak, slid out of the bed and groped for the heavy metal nightstand beside him. The security guard lunged. I didn't stand a chance. He dropped the pillow and grabbed my neck with one hand, lifting me off the ground like a rag doll. Air vanished from my lungs. I kicked, I scratched, but he was immense. "You should have stayed in your corner, girl," he growled, squeezing harder. My vision began to darken. Black spots danced before my eyes. I glanced at the bed. Arthur was there, his chest motionless, without the bag. I was dying, and he would die seconds after me. This was the end. But then, a metallic sound tore through the darkness. It didn't come from the door. It came from the bed. The guard paused, confused, and loosened his grip on my neck for a split second. That was enough. We both looked at Arthur. He wasn't lying down. With superhuman effort, fueled by pure adrenaline and 6 years of accumulated hatred, Arthur had sat up. In his right hand, which shook violently, he held the heavy bronze lamp from the nightstand. His eyes held no fear. They held fury. Before the guard could react, Arthur twisted his torso and brought the lamp down with all his remaining strength onto the man's head. The sound was horrible. Bone against metal. The guard collapsed to the floor like a tower, unconscious, releasing my neck. I fell to my knees, coughing, gasping for air. The room fell silent again, except for the rain outside and our ragged breathing. I dragged myself to the bed. Arthur had fallen back onto the pillows, exhausted, sweat soaking his forehead. I cupped his face in my hands, weeping. "Arthur, Arthur, you saved me." He looked deep into my eyes. He opened his mouth, fighting against atrophy, against the dryness, against the silence of a decade. His throat worked, and then, in a voice that was hoarse, broken, but incredibly steady, he said the 4 words that would change my life forever. "I remember everything." He didn't just remember the attack. He remembered my songs. He remembered my care. He knew who I was. And, most importantly, he knew exactly where Dr. Elio hid the evidence. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Arthur used the fallen guard's radio to call for help. When the siren lights illuminated the room, Dr. Elio was trying to flee through the back of the mansion with a suitcase full of cash, but he was intercepted. It turns out Arthur wasn't just any millionaire. He was a pharmaceutical tycoon who had uncovered a fraud scheme within his own company, a scheme led by his partner and executed by the lawyer, Dr. Elio. The stroke never happened. They poisoned him and kept him a prisoner in his own body to use his digital signature and slowly drain his fortune. Arthur's recovery was a medical miracle, but he told anyone who would listen that medicine had nothing to do with it. 3 months later, I was on a stage. Not in a dirty bar singing for pocket change, but in the municipal theater with a full orchestra behind me. In the front row, sitting in a wheelchair he promised to abandon soon, was Arthur. He was smiling. Before I began to sing, I remembered the day I went to visit him in the hospital to say goodbye. I thought I would go back to my old life, but he handed me an envelope. Inside, there wasn't a paycheck for my services. There was a partnership agreement. "You gave me my voice back," he told me that day. "Now, I'm going to make sure the whole world hears yours." He transferred half of his assets to my name. Billions. But it wasn't the money that changed my life. Money pays the bills, but it doesn't heal the soul. What changed my life was knowing that on those dark nights, when I thought I was singing to the void, someone was listening. My voice was the lifeline that held him to life, and his gratitude gave me the purpose I had always searched for. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The same lullaby I sang on the first night. But this time, it wasn't a song of fear. It was a song of victory,